Welcome to the English Language Institute of Singapore's podcast. I'm Eunice. Today's episode features Mrs. Yasila Vetri, a lead teacher of General Paper or GP for short at Hwa Chong Institution, giving her views about the teaching and learning of critical reading to Dr. Florence Lee, who was previously a GP teacher. We will also hear from Dr. Tay May Yin, Principal Master Teacher, who will provide perspectives on the teaching of critical reading that are aligned with the revised GP syllabus and the wider literature on critical reading.
Hello, Yasila.
Hi, Yasila.
Hello, May Yin and Florence.
We're very happy to have you here with us to speak about your practice of teaching critical reading. Yasila, you've been in service for almost 30 years, in roles such as Head of Department, Teaching Fellow at the NIE, Curriculum Specialist in MOE, and now as Lead Teacher.
Thanks, May Yin. Thanks for the introduction.
We are privileged to have you here with us, Yasila. When I was teaching GP, I often asked myself how critical reading could be more effectively taught. I'm keen to know more about how you have approached the teaching of critical reading.
Yes, critical reading has always been one of the aims stated in the General Paper syllabuses and the English language syllabuses through the decades. As a classroom practitioner, how would you define critical reading and what do you think it involves, Yasila?
Firstly, thanks for this opportunity to discuss with both of you the practice of teaching critical reading. Indeed, critical reading is a complex term to define. To define it, it would be necessary for us to identify the learner outcomes that we want to develop in our students. Critical reading is essentially about developing the dispositions, skills, and learner strategies to think critically before, while, and after reading. Critical readers read with some level of scrutiny. They will not take what they read and view at face value.
Yasila, your understanding of critical reading is closely aligned with the definition of critical reading explained in the Teaching and Learning Guide for the revised GP syllabus. Critical readers are, in essence, engaged in a dialogue with the text, considering and responding to the perspectives within the text, evaluating the accuracy and credibility of the text before formulating an opinion about it.
Yes, and to be able to engage in a dialogue with the text, critical readers will have to do close reading and metacognitive processing. Close reading has to be taught explicitly so that students have the skills to examine text carefully. They can then interpret how language and writing conventions are used to construct meaning effectively. For example, in order to infer the meaning of a word or a phrase, students must pay attention to the context and be skillful enough to identify contextual clues. In addition, students have to monitor their reading process and identify the challenges of reading. When they have difficulties in understanding the text due to, say, challenging vocabulary, they will have to figure out the meaning by identifying contextual clues. They will have to do metacognitive processing and apply the required skills to comprehend the text. In other words, close reading skills and metacognition empower students to become both independent and strategic readers.
Apart from the teaching of close reading and metacognitive skills, what have you noticed that your students need and enjoy doing in learning to become critical readers?
Fundamentally, critical reading requires good prior knowledge as well. I do notice that limited schema or prior knowledge can stifle critical reading and analysis in students. Hence, it is very important to make extensive reading a crucial part of teaching and learning, and have students engage in open discussions in a non-threatening environment. We also need to think of ways to teach the skills and learner strategies in a palatable way. So we need to make their experiences enjoyable, build on their stamina and interests, like use manipulatives, perhaps a close reading toolbox that will offer them a set of strategies, Lego set, do movie reviews, engage in an oral defense, enact a courtroom scene, and debate over current issues. In essence, we do not always have to begin with the text.
You know, Yasila, what you have highlighted is exactly what should be at the heart of GP teaching and learning. The focus on our students as learners. in determining why we teach, what we teach, when we teach, and how we teach. It is critical for us teachers to consider who we teach and what their learning needs, interests, and profiles are.
Yasila, I'm curious. How do you help your students appreciate the value of being critical readers?
Like many of us, Florence, I regard critical reading skills as a much needed set of life skills for my students. It is important that students appreciate the value of these skills beyond the context of the GCE A-level examination. I believe that an important part of teaching GP is to demonstrate the value and application of the skills for critical reading in real-world contexts. We need to seize teachable moments in class and refer to real-world incidents to establish the connection for our students. For example, I demonstrate to my students and teach them how to notice the choice of words, the position, the concerns, and the angle of the articles presented by the different news agencies. And in the application of their learning, it has been heartening for me to observe how my students analyze and evaluate the different texts, and some even move on to reframe their views about issues. And of course, it is always gratifying to have our students come back to tell us how useful critical reading skills are for their university studies.
Like you, Yasila, the students I used to teach appreciated the knowledge and skills they learned from GP lessons. Would you say that students who are critical readers learn more effectively?
Most definitely, Florence. Critical reading is fundamental to cognitive development, the pursuit of knowledge, problem solving, and logical decision making. When students read, they must apply all the fundamental skills of reading closely and reading critically. They have to access prior knowledge, skim, scan, predict content, and unpack linguistic and organization structures of the text. In addition, they must analyze, interpret, evaluate, and importantly, question the text. As critical readers, students compare their views with the views of the author. This sensitizes them to their own opinions, assumptions, and biases. They also acknowledge different perspectives with respect and with open minds. In the process, students recognize how text may privilege certain viewpoints over others. These are essential life skills that enable students to discern information in different contexts, locally, regionally, as well as globally.
Yasila, you have spoken with such strong conviction about why students' mastery of critical reading skills will enable them to develop the 21st century core competencies of critical and inventive thinking, as well as information and communication skills. How do you think the other 21st century core competencies of civic literacy, global awareness, and cross-cultural skills can be developed through students' mastery of critical reading?
An important aspect to consider today is that as learners, students are not only content receivers but also content creators. They have the responsibility to comprehend and gather information from accurate sources in order to make fair and noteworthy contributions. Critical reading empowers them to play their part to contribute to constructive discourse in the society. And that is an important disposition to develop 21st century competencies.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Yasila. I think that as our students vigorously participate in the exploration of issues, in learning to become critical readers, we teachers must shape and form in them certain dispositions of being inquirers and metacognitive learners. We appreciate very much your perspectives and experiences, Yasila.
Thank you for your insights, Yasila. I have learned so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, May Yin, and Florence. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode on the teaching and learning of critical reading, featuring Mrs. Yasila Vetri, Lead Teacher GP, Dr. Florence Lee, Master Teacher, and Dr. Tay May Yin, Principal Master Teacher. For this episode's show notes, do visit our podcast website at go.gov.sg/ELIS podcast. Thank you for listening.